Before the cards are dealt, he goes all in without looking.
Hey YouTube.
G'day again everyone, welcome back to the vlog. I'm getting ready to go to yet another Melbourne home game. It's one we've been to a few times with all the PLO double board bomb pods. So get ready for a crazy action session. I've been on a bit of a hot streak lately with these cash games, so really just hoping to ride that wave of momentum, and even if I do stop running good this session, just trying to stay focused and put in a good session. So without any further ado, let's go get in the game. Got into the game at about 8 p.m. and played all the way through till 2 a.m. So very solid 6-hour session with plenty of massive hands to go over. No PLO double board bomb pots, all these hands are no limit hold'em. And at the start of the session we were playing 1-3-6, but pretty quickly everyone agreed to play 5-5. And then 5-5 became 5-5-10 pretty quick when everyone was straddling. So massive session. Let's get into the first hand. The first hand is just a 1-3-6 to kick things off, and loose aggressive Raoul limps under the gun. Then the action's round to a loose aggressive G-man in the low jack. They go ahead and raise it to 35. Then they get called from the button, the big blind, and then the action's on my straddle with pocket fours, and I decide to throw in the call here, and then the under the gun does just call. So that's good for us. And what's even better for us is the flop is ace-9-4 with 2 diamonds. Let's go, we hit bottom set. The big blind checks it over to me, and I do briefly consider leading, but I think with 2 loose aggressive opponents that have position on us, we definitely want to go ahead and check it over to them to induce bets, which is what I do. And then under the gun checks, and the pre-flop aggressor does go ahead and c-bet 55. The action folds to me. Definitely have a hand strong enough to raise for value. I think the pre-flop aggressor is going to have a lot of ace-x in their range. We'll probably call a raise, putting me on some semi-bluffs like flush draws, but the thing is a lot of our flush draws want to just call multi-way, so we definitely want to balance that range out with some super strong hands like bottom set, and I do decide to call in this instance. Hop in the comments to let me know if you think that's a mistake, but I threw in the call here to protect that calling range, and then under the gun fold. So we're heads up to a turn, which is the 9 of clubs, so we make a full house on the turn. Go ahead and check it over to the pre-flop aggressor. One of the reasons I actually like just flatting on the flop is I think this opponent's going to continue to barrel with a lot of those ace-x hands, particularly the really strong ones, to try and get values from flush draws. So if we keep my calling down range with some nutted hands like pocket fours, there's a lot of incentive for us to do that. So I check it over to them. Unfortunately, they do check back. So we're off to the river, which is the 10 of diamonds, completing the front door flush. Very interesting whether I want to lead or not here. Part of me wants to check it over to the opponent, thinking that they do have a lot of flush draws in their range, being that they're not always going to bet those on a turn when the board paired, and they'll go for the value with some of their ace-x. Maybe they'll call a check raise, maybe they won't. It's a pretty thin spot. Or I could just lead to try and get paid off by one of those aces. In game, I thought, I really think they're going to bet call with a lot of flushes, and I don't want to miss value by just leading that and then having them just call. So I did check it over to them, and then they tank a little bit before checking back. So we're going to rake in this pot with our full house. I wonder if they would have called a river lead or not though. Next hand is a straight 5-5, and we're actually 10-handed for it. So a loose aggressive +2 player who would like to be called Panda goes ahead and opens it to 15. Then I'm in +3 with pocket 10s. I go ahead and 3-bet it to 50 here. There might be merit to organising a cold calling range here, and pocket 10s would definitely make sense in that range. I didn't want to do that though. I wanted to play 3-bet or fold, early position versus early position. So I made it 50, and the action's back around to +2. And they throw in the call. So we're heads up to a flop of Queen Jack 4 Rainbow. The opponent checks. I definitely think I should be checking on this board with pocket 10s. I want a better, stronger range of hands on this board in particular. And potentially, if we do check a hand like pocket 10s here, we're going to induce bluffs from my opponent on the turn. So I decide to check it back, and we do get a free turn, which is the Jack of Spades putting out backdoor spades and pairing middle pair. And then the opponent betting 85. So I did check on the flop to induce bluffs from my opponent on the turn. So probably should be calling here, getting 2.3 to 1. So I do throw in the call, and then we get to see a river, which is the 4 of clubs pairing bottom pair. Then my opponent's in the tank, probably a good 30 seconds before going ahead and betting 260. So pretty big bet. We're getting 2.1 to 1 on a call, so we need to be good about a third of the time here. They could probably be betting like ace-4 suited, maybe 5-4 suited as well, and those hands are now stuff we lose to. So definitely concerned we lose to a lot, but I kind of want to call just because those suited connectors between 6-5 suited all the way to 10-9 suited did miss, and I think they're fine bluffing hands for my opponent to use. So I definitely do want to bluff catch here sometimes, considering my opponent has all those bluffs. Pocket tens, it's actually a bit dicey. It's kind of one of the worst hands to have because I do block king 10 suited and ace 10 suited. Like pocket nines would probably be a better call here. I decided my opponent was using all of those suited connectors as a bluff, in which case we are getting the right price to call, only having to be good about a third of the time. So I throw in the call, and then the opponent mucks their hand. So let's go. We drag in a second pot of the session, and the bluff catch worked. So the next hand is the first 5-5-10 of the session, and we actually got the button bounty going as well. So every hand, the button put $5 on the actual physical button that we were using, and it accumulated each hand until someone won their hand on the button, and if they did, they won all the money on the button. It's a good way to force a bit of action in the game, and I'm definitely a fan of it in home games. And at this point, the button had $25 on it. Panda goes ahead and open limps the low jack, then I'm in the hijack with pocket queens. I go ahead and ISO raise it to 50. I think with the button bounty dynamic and the chances that the button's going to overcall pretty wide with the extra incentive, I could even use a larger raise size here, made it 50, and then predictably the button does overcall and the low jack calls as well. So we're three ways to a flop of 10-4-4 with two hearts. Low jack checks it over to me, and I do consider checking it over to the button, who I think is going to bluff pretty aggressively with the button bounty on. Having said that, I think it's a good spot to go ahead and bet, because whilst I think the button will bluff aggressively, I actually think they're going to call pretty wide. I think they're going to have a bunch of 10x, 10-9 offsuit, jack 10 offsuit, 10-6 suited. So I just think it's a good spot to bet for value for that reason. So I go ahead and make it 60. Then the button calls and the low jack folds. So it heads up to a turn, which is the 5 of clubs putting out backdoor clubs. The action's on me, and I definitely want to continue betting for value. I think it's very likely my opponent has a bunch of 10x hands in their range. Plus, they can have front door flush draw. They can actually have a bunch of backdoor flush draws too. I think every ace-x of clubs is going to call on the flop. So I go ahead and make it 200. And then the opponent doesn't think too long before throwing in the call. So it heads up to the river, which is the 7 of clubs. Definitely not the best river in the world. The backdoor flush does get in. And so I have to decide whether I want to bet or not. It's just very awkward. I really want to bet because I think my opponent has a lot of worse one pair hands that might call. But I do like being a bit cautious here as well. My opponent's going to have a bunch of backdoor flushes in their range and potentially a few 4x hands. So it's sort of dicey, because if my opponent is able to hero fold those 10x hands to a third barrel, then I'm only getting called by better hands, which is pretty disastrous. So I do take the more cautious option and check it over to the opponent. They check back straight away, so pretty sure we're good here. I turn over my queens and they end up mucking. Very likely they had a 10x hand, and really I wonder if they would have called a river bet or not. Next hand, tight aggressive Leon opens a hijack to 30, then Panda calls in the cutoff, and then I'm on the button with ace 2 of diamonds. We've got $45 on the button bounty, so I think this is a good spot to throw in the call. Could 3-bet as well, but I decided to call in this instance. And Ryan calls in the straddles. We're 4 different ways to a flop of king 8 deuce with 1 diamond. The action checks to the hijack, who c-bets 50. Cutoff folds. The action's on me, and I decide to call here. We've got the backdoor nut flush draw. We got showdown value with bottom pair, and definitely not folding with the extra incentive of the button bounty. I throw in the call, and then the straddle calls as well. So we're still 3 ways to a turn, which is the king of spades, putting out backdoor spades. Now the action checks to me, and I'm very, very tempted to bluff here. The fact that the turn's a king, it blocks my opponents having a really strong hand like trips, and I can very credibly represent a king x hand, king 9 offsuit, basically every king x suited combination, the hijack off like pocket 10s, pocket 9s, and get the straddle off of 8x hand. Maybe it won't work and it is a bit face up when I do have the button bounty, but I'm still going to try and push it anyway and try and represent a king x. I go ahead and bet 200, then the straddle folds really quickly, then the hijack thinks a little bit before laying the hand down. So let's go. Not only do we successfully bluff pot, but we also pull in the button bounty. Happy days. Next hand, Panda opens the hijack to 35, then I'm in the cutoff with pocket 10s, I 3-bet it to 100, and he throws in the call. So we heads up to a flop of ace king 6 with 2 spades. When the hijack checks it over to me, it's always pretty interesting in these spots when I'm the pre-flop 3-better, and it's an ace king x board, because I'm going to have so many top pairs, so many 2 pairs on this board. When I do have a more middling strength hand like pocket 10s, it's always pretty awkward. I've dabbled with a few different strategies. Sometimes I'll check this hand just to try and get to showdown, but I always find that super awkward when my opponent goes ahead and bets on the turn, because I'm going to bet most of my, ace king, pocket kings on the flop, right? So I just feel like my range is a bit unprotected in that instance. I could figure out a way to protect it by checking some of my ace-x combinations on the flop, but I also think having a range bet does make a lot of sense as well. If I'm going to have a range bet here, I need to bet my pocket tens as well. That's what I just decided to do in this instance. I go ahead and bet 50, and then my opponent throws in the call. So it still heads up to a turn, which is the 9 of diamonds, putting out backdoor diamonds. The opponent checks it over to me. Now I'm absolutely going to go ahead and check back. I think my opponent has a bunch of ace-x hands in their range. Then we get to see a river, which is the ace of clubs. So pretty good river because it does block some of the ace-x combinations my opponent has. But then they go ahead and bet 250, so pretty large bet here. I'm getting 2.3 to 1 on a call, so I need to be a good 30% or more to actually profitably call here. And even though the ace of clubs is a really good river because it blocks my opponent's ace-x combinations, I still think they just have so many, since they're probably calling pre-flop with ace-10 offsuit through ace-queen offsuit, and they have all the, ace-x of hearts, ace-x of spades combinations, so there's a bunch of stuff I lose to. And if they are bluffing, it would have to be with something pretty unnatural, like a 6x that wasn't trying to get showdown, or they floated on the flop with, like 10-9 suited, 8-7 suited. And the problem with me ranging them on some hands like that is the 9 of diamonds on the turns block some of those, because I don't think they're going to go ahead and bet a 9 to this sizing on the river. So I really do give them credit for all those ace-x, and I don't think I'm good here 30% of the time with my pocket tens. So I end up folding, and then the opponent was actually kind enough to show us the ace of spades. So we made a good fold on this river. Very happy with that. Next hand, there's about 5 on the button bounty, and tight aggressive Leon goes ahead and open limps in +2. Panda limps in the hijack, then I'm in the cutoff with pocket eights. I go ahead and raise it up to 60, and then Raoul calls on the button, then the action's back around to +2, and he goes ahead and rips it all in for 445. Panda folds in the hijack. The action's back on me in the cutoff with eights, and pretty close spot whether we want to call or fold. I think the opponent's probably going to have a lot of overpairs in their range to my eights, but I also think they could have ace-king offsuit, ace-queen offsuit, and maybe the occasional bluff like ace-5 suited, or they just think I'm ISOing really light and they're going to go ahead and rip it in with 6-5 suited. So pretty close spot whether we want to call or not. But if I do give them credit for some of those bluffs like 6-5 suited, it's probably a good spot to call off. I throw in the call, then the button folds, and then Leon shows us ace-king, and we got the live run out there for you. We got the live run out. Pretty good start so far on the queen high flop. Just have to fold that. Ace of spades on the turn. GG to Leon, they ended up getting us in this hand. Maybe calling off with eights was a bit too ambitious. Next hand, I'm under the gun with ace-queen of hearts. I go ahead and open it up to 25, and I get no less than 4 different callers. Welcome back to Live Poker Lead Bets. So we go 5 different ways to a flop of 9-4-4 with 2 hearts. So pretty good flop. We do make the nut flush, but the small blind and the straddle check it over to me, and I really want to go ahead and check in this spot. I know we do have a strong hand with a lot of equity, but we're playing against 4 different opponents, out of position to 2 people, including a loose aggressive low jack and button. So I would rather check it over to them and induce bets from worse hands. I think even if I had a hand as strong as an overpair, I probably would check. Maybe even 4x, it would make more sense to check raise, then go ahead and lead yourself. So when we have the nut flush draw, I think it's a slam dunk check. I go ahead and check, and then the action does check to G-Man on the button, who goes ahead and bets 55. Small blind calls, then the action folds to me, and I throw in the call. Some merit to check raising. The problem with it is I'm literally only representing pocket nines or ace-4 suited, being that I opened under the gun in a 3 blind game, so I think that's way too narrow of a range to represent. Low jack folds. So we're 3 ways to a turn, which is the king of spades. The small blind checks it to me, and now I start to think this king is pretty good for my range. I'm going to have a lot of ace-king on this board, actually, because ace of hearts, king, of spades, clubs, diamonds, they're all going to float on the flop. So I could actually very credibly represent a king X by betting here, just because those hands are going to want to lead, being that if the button has a 9x, they're going to check back, and if they're going to have a flush draw, they're going to call anyway. So it's good to mix in some bluffs as well. And a hand like the nut flush is a great one to use. So I go ahead and bet 150. The button folds pretty quickly. Small blinds tanks a little bit before throwing in the call. So it heads up to a river, and the river, it's the 8 of hearts. Let's go. We make the nut flush on the river. Leon checks it over to me. Slam dunk value bet spot here. Pretty interesting sizing decision. I think part of me kind of wants to use a larger bet size, being that a worse flush will always call, of course. But part of me kind of wants to use a smaller bet size too, because if my opponent has a 9x, I want to give them a good price to call. Even some king x will probably be scared off by the flush, so they might fold as well. So yeah, I end up coming to a middle ground and bet 300. I think it's not a spot where I should be going for a middle ground. I think I should either rip it all in to try and maximize value against a worse flush, or really give my opponent's 9x a good price to call and bet something like 200. I chose the middle ground though, and I'm not very happy about it. I made it 300, and then Leon is in the tank probably a good 30 seconds or so before laying his hand down. Damn, so probably missed value by not using a smaller size, and missed EV by not ripping it all in when my opponent has a worse flush. Next hand, there's 45 on the button bounty, and Panda goes ahead and open limps the hijack. Then I'm in the cutoff with Ace King offsuit. I go ahead and make it 50. I don't think I learnt my lesson from the pocket queen's hands. Really should be raising like 65 to 75 in my opinion. I made it 50 though, and then predictably, Raul on the button calls, the straddle calls, as stars the hijack. So we're 4 different ways to a flop. Ace 8 deuce with 2 diamonds. We do have the ace of diamonds, so when the action checks to me, definitely consider going ahead and betting here. Try to get value from any ace x hand as well as flush draws. I decided to check it though. Really wanted to induce bluffs from a loose aggressive Raul on the button, who I think is going to stab pretty aggressively when they do have the extra incentive of the button bounty, who does check back. So much for that plan. Still 4 ways to a turn, which is the 5 of diamonds, putting in front door diamonds. The action checks to me again. I think it's a good spot to go ahead and bet, just because I don't really think the opponents have many flushes in their range. I think the straddle or the hijack is just going to go ahead and lead a flush on the turn when the action checks through on the flop. And I think the button's going to bet with most of their semi-bluffs on the flop with the extra incentive of the button bounty. So I think the chance I have the best hand is very likely. You can actually bet to get value from any hand that's like a pair plus a diamond draw. So I go ahead and make a 150. The button calls and the other opponent's fold. So it heads up to the river, which is the ace of clubs, repeating the ace. The action's on me now, and pretty confusing spot, because like I said on the flop, I think my opponent's going to have a lot of like 1 pair plus diamond hands. And I'm not sure if those hands will call on this river or not. I mean, part of me thinks they will, just because this ace blocks like some of my strongest hands, like a checked flopped ace. But then at the same time, I kind of just want to check it over to the opponent to induce bluffs, since they might bet off with some of those hands to try and like scare me off of, you know, pocket queens with a diamond or something like that. I ultimately do decide to check. I think betting's probably the better option though. I just don't think my opponent has many just airball hands that they're going to try and bluff with. I think most of the hands do have some type of showdown value, like a pair and a flush draw. And I should just bet to try and get value from those. But I went ahead and checked it over to the villain, and they're in the tank probably a good 20 seconds or so before checking back 8-5 of clubs. So they actually turned 2 pair, and we got lucky to suck out on them on the river. I asked if he would call a river bet, and he said that he would fold. So take that for what it's worth. The next hand occurred at about maybe 1:15 in the morning, and people had started to leave the game. But the action definitely didn't start to wind down, because the next hand was a 5, 5, 10, 20, 40. So yeah, pretty big game. Maybe the biggest blinds we've played on this vlog ever. So the action's on my button with ace 10 offsuit. I go ahead and open raise it to 90. Then I get a call from Aaron in the big blind, and we go heads up to a flop of 10-4-4, rainbow board, and the opponent checks it over to me. Definitely want to go ahead and c-bet with a hand as strong as top pair here. I think my opponent's got a cold call with a lot of worse 10x hands. I just want to get value from those as well if they want to float with, you know, like king queen, king jack. So I go ahead and bet 130, and then the opponent throws in the call. So we're still heads up here, 2 of diamonds, putting in backdoor diamonds. The opponent checks it over to me, and my logic for c-betting on the flop is pretty much the same on this turn. I think my opponent's going to have a bunch of worse 10x hands, and the board's just gotten wetter now. There's backdoor diamonds out there as well, so it's just more hands I can get value from, and not really concerned about my opponent having a 4x. You know, ace 4 suited, maybe 4-5 suited will make a bit of sense, but we block ace 4 suited, and I just think it's going to be a worse 10x much more often. Go ahead and make it 330, and the opponent's in the tank maybe 15 seconds or so before throwing in the call. So it heads up to a river, which is the ace of hearts. Let's go. We make 2 pair on the river, and then big blinds in the tank, maybe like 10 seconds or so before sliding out 5 black chips. Let's go. We're loving that they're betting here. I think it's pretty likely that they are bluffing, to be honest. A lot of hands that have backdoor diamonds are definitely going to call on the turn. Will have missed on this river. They're just going to go ahead and bet to try and put me off of an overpair to try and represent an ace X. I also do think it's pretty likely they have an ace X themselves, most notably ace X of diamonds. I think they're going to float on the flop with like ace 2 of diamonds, ace 9 of diamonds, just basically all of those. Definitely think they could be value betting a hand like that. So the question comes down to, is it too thin to raise for value from those hands? I think the answer to that question is yes, just because the opponent's going to know I have a lot of hands like ace king and ace queen in my range, and ace 10, of course, pocket 10s, ace 4 suited. So if I did raise on this river, like, what am I bluffing with? Like, it'd have to be king, queen of diamonds, maybe miss diamonds myself, and I just really think with my tighter table image at the game, I wouldn't get credit for having many bluffs here. I think my opponent's going to fold most ace-x hands, and I'm just free rolling when my opponent does have 4-5 or ace-4 suited. I throw in the call pretty quickly, and then the opponent just looks upset and says, "You're good." They end up mucking their hand. So we rake in a pretty massive pot here. Definitely a good spot to run good when you're playing with the triple straddle on. So people had started to leave the game at this point, and there were about 5 of us left playing, and I really think Panda was looking to gamble it up at this point because he'd started going all in every hand without looking. He started off with about 500 and he'd run his stack up to about 1.1k at this point, which is where this next hand happens. Before the cards are dealt, he goes all in the big blind without looking, and the action actually folds to me in the straddle. I look down at Queen Jack of Spades, absolute snap call in this spot against a range of any 2 cards. We're going to be an equity favourite here. So I throw in the call, then the opponent shows 4-5 offsuits. We're in absolutely beautiful shape. The flop is ace-9-5 with 3 diamonds, which is absolutely brutal because they hit their pair to move ahead, but they also have the 4 diamonds, killing 2 of our outs. And then we see the turn is the 2 of diamonds, which puts us out of our misery because now we're drawing completely dead. And the opponent scoops us on this 2.2k pot without even looking at their cards. Pretty brutal way to end the session. In terms of my gameplay grade from this session, I'm going to give myself an A. Was really happy with how I played for the most part. Definitely did make a few mistakes. I think I wasn't adjusting to the button bounty correctly with my pre-flop raising sizes. You've got to go a bit bigger to disincentivize calls from the button / get value from the button. So a bit disappointed with that. Also, there were a few instances where I checked to induce bets from loose aggressive opponents, and it worked out sometimes, and it is a good spot to do it sometimes, but I definitely did defer to it in that hand where I had top pair with the ace king and the 2 diamonds, and I'm probably better off just betting in spots like that when we're playing live poker multi-way. So I might have missed a bit of value in those specific instances, but the fact that I was still, thinking about inducing bluffs from loose aggressive opponents, I do think is a smart play in general. So whilst I think I need to tweak it a bit, it's not a massive mistake. The only really significant mistake I think I made this session was calling off with the pocket ace pre-flop and using the sort of medium bet size with when I river the nut flush. I think those are pretty bad errors and just definitely need to learn from them, but for the rest of the hands, I'm really stoked with how I play. I think I was making good decisions, good reads on my opponents, and if I played like this every single time I played poker, I'd absolutely be crushing it in my opinion. So, going to give myself the A grade for the performance. In terms of results from the 5-5-10 game, I ended up buying in for 1,500 and cashing out for 2,350 after I tipped the dealer. So definitely a nice profit, especially considering I lost that 2.2k flip at the end. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for sticking all the way to the end of the vlog. That helps my channel's analytics and I do appreciate it. Hop in the comments below, give me your thoughts on these hands. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.